Welcome, everyone. I am Bob Wurzelbacher, the director of the Respect Life Office for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and this is our video podcast series that we call Being Pro-Life. Each month, we discuss a different topic in the Respect Life arena. We'll hear a personal story from someone deeply affected by that issue, and finally, we'll share ways that you can get involved. This month, we're going to talk about the effects of technology and media on family life, and especially how to utilize it in your families while keeping your kids safe from some of those dangers. As always, we have a special guest. Will you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Jenkins, and I am a school psychologist in Troy, Ohio, and I've been there for right at 17 years.
17 years. So Jason, tell us a little bit more about yourself. Kids, what's your family life?
Sure. I have 3 children with my wife, Teresa. We've been married for 16 years. We have a daughter who is our oldest. She just turned 14. We have a son soon to be 13, and then another son soon to be 11. So we have 3 children, all pretty close in age.
Yes, you do. So 14, 13, 11, I would say you are right in the midst of those questions that everyone is asking about. How do I let my kids online? When do I give them a phone? All those kinds of questions that we're all asking ourselves. Let's start to try to be a little positive, right? What are some of the positive things that you would say about this advancement in technology and all the things that we can do on our mobile devices and on television, and et cetera, for good Catholic families today?
I think one of the biggest perks of technology is the ease at which we can access information. The wealth of knowledge that is actually out there is pretty impressive.
Right.
I think another piece with technology that's a neat feature is the way we can stay in constant contact with folks. The communication piece is a big part, again, of media if it's used appropriately. Those are 2 big selling points for me with technology. It keeps us connected if we're using it appropriately, and the vast information that is out there. I live 600 miles away from my old hometown, so media is a great way to stay in contact.
As we all know, that's been especially true this past year, right?
Absolutely.
My kids were able to stay in contact with their friends. We made online play dates over the past year that we never did before. And I was still able to stay in contact with my mother, who I would otherwise would have driven down the road and visited her, but I was really being careful, at least in the beginning. I certainly agree with all that. And yet, we know that there are concerns, particularly as a school psychologist. What are some of the concerns that you even have seen with other kids, if not your own kids, that we need to be concerned about?
And there's a lot of research that's coming out, as we have had really cell phones for the last 10 to 15 years, especially for teenagers. It makes them very aloof. There's a high correlation with depression and anxiety with screen time. It's a pretty significant correlation. Kids that obviously have more screen time are showing more signs of depressive symptoms and anxiety. See that a lot in school. They get so self-absorbed with the technology. I think those are 2 big areas I see as the anxiety and depression. And the other piece that comes with that is the lack of communication skills I'm seeing with a lot of these youth. So even just verbal conversation sometimes seems to be lacking for children. On our own family, we just crossed that threshold of we just got our 14-year-old daughter a phone.
Right.
With many caveats and many features and parental controls, and hopefully those things outweigh those potential negatives. But I have seen a lot of kids demonstrate a lot of depressive symptoms. They get on those social media sites, and it's a whole nother world that they have to navigate. And without a lot of parental support in some of those worlds, because they can just access it whenever and however they want, it's a hard world for them to navigate. And the other big piece I see is just the ease of accessing stuff that's inappropriate, pornography being the biggest one.
Before we get there, that's going to be a big piece, but I almost hear kind of 2 different things. You were talking about screen time in general. There's just screen time and depression. And then there's being on social media and being exposed to perhaps bullying or societal pressures of how you're supposed to be that gets amplified on social media that could cause depression. Are we talking about 2 different things? Or do like a study saying that just being on a screen for so long in of itself is bad?
There is a little differentiation for sure. Just being on the screen seems to have a lot of negative connotation, especially with peer interaction, communication skills. They are showing a high correlation with anxiety and depression, just amount of screen time. So just quantifying how much time kids are on a screen or in front of some type of screen or device is showing some negative side effects. Now, I think when you delve a little deeper into when they're getting into social media, that exacerbates, I think, a lot of that. I think they kind of run simultaneous, but I think they're very 2 distinct things. It's one more thing that kids have to navigate and usually don't have the support or the wherewithal or the frontal lobe to navigate some of those conditions.
Is there a rule of thumb, right? When you say screen time between television,
Yes,
video games, particularly perhaps in the summer when they're not busy with school and homework,
sure.
was there like, wow, they really just shouldn't be on any type of screen for more than X amount of time? Do you have a kind of a rule of thumb?
I'm not sure about the latest research. We try just within our own family to limit screen time in its entirety because we
Right.
include TV to really 2 hours or less a day. Right. I think there has to be some limits. I think research has shown that most kids now that number continues to go up. I know a couple years ago, it was an average of about 3 to 4 hours of screen time a day. That was usually for school age children. And my guess is that has actually gone up. And we actually try to limit it. We say after a certain time, you're not allowed on it. The TV turns off, the computer's off. We actually don't have tablets. We have one central computer in our house that sits in our office. We have one television set. Some kids aren't allowed to have TVs in their room. And then the cell phones go in a little cabinet we have in the kitchen in the charging station, and they have to be on dock by about 9 o'clock. In our little, nook of the world and being on a farm, and we can really limit that because there's a lot of activities to do. We're also blessed that our children love to read. You actually have
Right.
to usually pull them away from books. For at least me and my wife Teresa, we really navigated that. We didn't want them to have any device, so it was really a hard decision to even hand our daughter a cell phone because we haven't had Kindles, we haven't had iPads, we haven't even had iPods. They really haven't had any kind of media device. I can say, just with that comparison, it was really nice because it was one less thing as a parent you actually had to worry about, that you had to manage, that you had to monitor.
So in your family, you're kind of a rule of thumb of 2 hours. This might just get into the specifics of family. But I'm just talking about my own. It's very typical. It's a Friday night family movie night. So an hour and a half, 2 hours on Friday night, family gets together, watches a movie.
Mhm.
That is always going to be in addition to whatever limits they have on their own personal
Sure.
media. Do you have that kind of a thing? Do you ever sit as a family together? And is that in addition to whatever restrictions you have on their personal
Yes.
devices?
And I would say we actually do quite a bit of that. We've gotten here recently where we watched the Chosen series. Kids really
Right.
kind of get into that. So we love kind of watching that. We're big Friday, Saturday night, family night kind of families. I think that's in addition to what we normally try to do. I think that is time that's one well spent. And then it's usually with information we've already pre-screened that we know is probably going to be
Right.
advantageous. That's good, just wholesome family
But
fun.
when it comes to media, just in general, I mean, it feels like it used to be easier to just assume a certain show was going to be safe and you didn't have to watch the whole thing first and then decide whether or not your kids can watch it. But for me, when it comes to promotion of either homosexual relationships or to some extent even transgender, seems to be more of a hey kids love everyone, kind of easily confuse the message of loving everyone means acceptance, right, of
Sure.
non-Christian definitions of marriage. How do you navigate that with young preteens and what they can watch on television?
I think it's hard because I think you hit the nail on the head. There's so much more in the media that is much more explicit, and there's so many innuendos. And I think that makes it hard for kids because they inadvertently are very much targeting certain things when they're presenting a show or a topic. We have cable, and we would turn the show off quickly because we're like, where did that come from? It seems like things are rolling along. This show seems okay. And then you're like, whoa, bad word, or that wasn't even subtle. Some of the
Right.
innuendos and things they make, so I think for parents it's hard because we tried to come out with these things years ago. There's these parental ratings, which I think we have found are very loose, extreme. They're like, oh, this is PG, this is PG-13, this is for mature audiences. And I think what I have seen, at least personally, they keep skewering that further and further down. Used to 18-year-olds. And I think about this when I was a kid. I'm like, I don't ever remember shows being able to say certain cuss words. Profane
Right.
words were just not allowed.
Right. They
And
just weren't
now it's
there.
like you can just use them left and right on the radio, on the TV, of course, then on media, YouTube. My son was just watching a YouTube video not too long ago, and I was like, whoa, 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 what was that? And it seemed to be a harmless, they were just critiquing this Minecraft video. And there all of a sudden there was this curse bomb that just popped
Right.
up. Like, buddy, we need to turn, I think we need to turn that off. But if
Yeah.
me and my wife wouldn't have been close by, the scary thing is he'd have heard that, maybe would have asked a question about it. Being a 10 or 11-year-old boy, probably not. And then that would have registered. I think it's hard. I mean, I think for parents, more so than ever, our alertness to things, I would say, has to be pretty high because there is so much information coming at our children that one, as parents, we have to filter because some of it is profane, some
Right.
of it is inappropriate.
Where are you with your kids' ages in terms of allowing them to watch it anything without you being there? You always there? Do you always trust your kids to bring something up?
My wife's a stay-at-home mom, so we have that luxury, so a lot of times, because we only have one TV, we have an open floor plan, sits right off the kitchen. We're usually around, and that is not always the case. We do have, I hope, a certain level of trust with them, because we've made it very specific things they can't and shouldn't watch when we're not around. We have limited a few parental controls. We have Sling, which is a web-based service provider. There are several channels that, they've been told you just don't click on. Unfortunately, it's TBS and USA Network. We recently had to really help navigate with them. They like to pull up the YouTube videos because we have a smart TV, so you can get the YouTube videos. And again, some of them look very harmless. And like you said, with some of that media, there's no rating. I know we have Sling, for an example. You can click on it and it gives you a very brief description, which usually doesn't really encompass
Right.
what you think you're going to see or get. And
Right.
the YouTube and Instagram and the other social media sites I think are policed probably even less. They're just, hey, click on this video and here's a 4 or 5 word description of what the video might be. And then you click on it and you're like, well, that was not what the video said at all.
Right. Right.
Unfortunately.
Right.
Generally, our kids, we kind of allow them a little bit of TV time. We're not here, but generally one of me or my wife or both of us are here. I just think that's a little bit easier. Our kids have had, some conversation about things they've seen. We talk to them about it on the computer. If anything ever pops up or something seems real fishy, you let us know right away. I know when we got the PlayStation, that was another media piece. We didn't connect it to the internet. And that was something I'm like, yeah, I don't mind you playing some games here and there. We really kind of try to screen the games. They're mostly sports games. They're like, oh, Dad, we can link and we can talk. Oh, no, we don't need to be doing some of those things. You can play games with your brother and sister. I don't need to know that you're playing with somebody down the street that we've never met through a headset.
Yeah, my kids are just getting into that as well. And at the moment, they will play a game online with somebody who we know their families, and they are connected with that person. But there's absolutely no open, anybody feels like playing with you from who knows where and who knows how old they really are. So what about with bullying and social media? And do they have Facebook accounts? How much do you have to watch those? Does your filtering service at your phone help you with that?
Thankfully, we just crossed into our daughter having a cell phone, but we do not, none of our kids have any type of social media accounts. My wife has a Facebook account. I have 0 social media accounts. Part of that's the nature of my job. I just don't, I like to keep those things separate. And again, not knocking some aspects of social media, but that is one thing I would highly encourage parents to limit. I think that the adage less is more sums up social media perfectly. It is just a platform that is so much harder to manage. It's not always based in reality. And we have teenagers whose brains haven't formed and they're forming all these synapses and trying to form these emotional and social and spiritual connections. And to have a realm out there that as parents, it makes me really nervous that I can't police like I can in the physical world. Less is definitely more, because then we turn these kids loose. You mentioned parental controls. Thankfully, that's the other advantage of technology. There's some things that definitely can be put in place to help. You can even monitor your router. You can monitor social media sites. You can
Right.
put apps. There's even parental control software. So there are many things I think to help parents, but no, as of yet, our children don't have any social media accounts. I would prefer for that to stay that way as long as humanly possible.
Right. Have you have any difficulty with that? Did you say 14? Your
Mhm.
oldest is 14?
Mhm.
Is she like, look, all my friends are on Instagram. Why can't I be on whatever it is? What is the story with the 14-year-old?
Bob, that's a good conversation, because I think for years, especially when she was about 12, Dad, I want a phone. Everybody's got a phone. We had made it very clear to her that that was non-negotiable at that point. And it's funny to see her now. She's only had the phone for a month, so take that with a very small sample size.
Right.
I think has carried over some of those things we were trying to initiate even without the phone into this. We had a great conversation about the pitfalls of social media. I hope, at least with me and my wife being very firm in our stance with not getting the phone. And then we did. She opened up the phone and there was this list, a couple bullet points of, this is when me and your mom always have access to it. These are some of the limits you have on it. These are some of the things we're always going to ask you. I hope, at least, again, hearing that she is a teenager with Dad, so and so has this. When she first got the phone, I said, as of right now, you can put a few game apps on there if you want that we've checked out. You can do the group texting. You do have some limited access to internet. But as of now, and I'll cross my fingers and say a prayer, she has no access to social media on her site. And thankfully, doesn't seem, at least on the surface, as interested in that. And I hope that's something, a seed that me and her mom have planted.
Are you aware of specific apps that you want to suggest to parents who have kids that are on social media?
Yes, one of the things we have through the school, and parents can have reports to this, is Go Guardian. That's more of a education based, but it alerts administrators. We can send reports to parents. You mentioned Net Nanny, I think earlier, is a pretty good one for parental control software. There's Custodio, which is spelled Qustudio. It's
Okay.
supposed to be a pretty highly rated one. And then Norton has a family piece to their antivirus and different things, are four that I'm somewhat familiar with. I mean, Net Nanny's been around a while. Go Guardian, like I said, was something we use because our school uses it, and and because I work in the school, I can access it. Thankfully, the district I work in and the district my kids go to both use it. But it's really nice. It even alerts if there's certain statements they make, and or if there's any, and it filters all the content like most of these parental controls do. And there's certain things you can kind of increase the sensitivity to certain things, which is kind of nice as a parent. So if, for example, Go Guardian will let them know if there's anything that looks suicidal,
Right.
there's any type of threatening action. And then of course, certain websites are just flat out flagged and blocked based
Right.
off how you set that criteria. So those are things I would definitely encourage parents. I see more and more coming out because I think with the technology boom, people are seeing some pitfalls and some disadvantages. So then people on the other side are going, well, let's make more technology.
So Go Guardian, is that something you can privately subscribe to as well? Go
You
Guardian?
can't per se. So like we can send parent reports. I can see those parent reports, but it's not something a parent can specifically set. So the other three, the Norton family, the
Okay.
Net Nanny, and Custodio, would be something parents could purchase and implement on certain devices and have much more self-management.
Now, Covenant Eyes, I think that's pretty limited to pornography, I believe.
Yes.
Whereas you were talking about like Net Nanny, I'm just looking at it right now, actually. It's a
Mhm.
screen time. I think it has filtering of pornography. Does it have things related to the social media?
You can set some parameters. I think it's what a lot of things, even when they first introduced parental controls to TV years ago, you can make it as narrow or as broad sometimes of a spectrum of what you want it to kick out or keep in. But yes, my understanding is Net Nanny does have some things where you can actually specifically, because it's still web based. And once they go to a website, whether it be Twitter or Instagram, you can then kind of tell it to scroll. And that parental software is pretty neat because it works in real time to really search that whole page, that whole site. If things come up, it can alert you through an app on your phone, or it'll even block certain things just flat out, like as a web filter. It'll just say, you can't open this page.
So the big obvious one, so pornography, right? We all know how easy that is to access online. Are you aware of issues, how that can be such a problem in a young person's life now, and how important it is, and what we can do to keep that out of our homes and off of our devices when we give those to our kids?
Absolutely. There is a lot of research for pornography. That research is now coming down to younger ages because the access is much greater. But there is a high level of correlation with school problems, problems with later intimacy. You see a lot of aggressive issues, especially in boys. There's a high correlation with pornography viewership and aggressive. You also have the demeaning of women. It changes a lot with the sexuality and the intimacy. And a lot of those correlations have been made for years. The other scary research is they've shown that pornography actually changes brain chemistry, similar to a drug. And when kids don't understand that there's the dangers, because there's really no limit to pornography, the limit should be zero. And for a lot of kids, with the ease of access, the lack of supervision, and there are more things out there. I went through a thing 2 or 3 years ago, some training on social media and pornography, and it was very frightening. And because we know everything's out there on the web, and then there's this even dark web that kind of freaks me out, and I lose sleep at night that people can access. The amount of stuff that is profane, that is
Right.
horribly inappropriate, and in kids. We've had several instances in our own school district and school system, and I've heard this in other school systems where people will send inappropriate pictures, and
Right.
trying to explain to these kids that is forever captured in cyberspace. And then this young kid shares the information with one of two or five or six thousands of his buddies. And then we have these situations where people don't understand how it exacerbated so quickly. And then it becomes very embarrassing. There's a lot of guilt. Those are things for families, especially. Pornography destroys our sense of intimacy. It destroys relationships. If kids get to it sooner, that trajectory starting a whole lot sooner, where there's damage in relationships, kids are becoming more aggressive, more distant. What I have found too in schools is there's more access to pornography, and then we go less on the end of why it's bad, how you form appropriate viewpoints of sexuality and intimacy, because pornography for a lot of kids is where they get that. That's not an appropriate model for any of those things. I think me and you know that. I think a
Right.
lot of our listeners will probably know that. But I think for a lot of people, if you can limit things, social media is bad, but the pornography, and it can be very damaging. And once it's kind of like this rabbit hole, because it does really engage the brain in negative ways, it makes it a very difficult addiction to break. And if kids are accessing that at 11, 12, 13 years of age, they're kind of getting a head start and not the appropriate head start
Right.
on some of this
Right.
inappropriate
Right.
information. And then by the time they're high school, young adults, they have very skewed perceptions of relationships, healthy relationships, intimacy, even views of self, because some of that stuff can damage how we view our sexuality. I think when you view a lot of pornography too, there's recent research that shows how it links to a lot of these other sexuality issues. You have a lot more disordered thoughts because it's hard to filter all that information. You go, well, I saw this on this show, so that must be okay, or it must be
Right.
real, or it must be a model
Right.
that I need to follow.
Like, that seems like a nice person, and that's what they believe. So it must be okay.
Right.
So I suppose you would suggest if your child at any age, no matter how young they are, frankly, if they ever have any access to the internet without you being around, you absolutely have to have some kind of filtering device. And if you don't have any kind of filtering device, don't give your child 1 minute of access to the internet without you being around until you've got that. That's a solid rule right there, because otherwise they're going to find it.
I think that's a great point, Bob, because I think at some juncture, my easy argument, we just don't let them get on anything that can connect to the internet. But I think if parents are going to dive into this, explore this, I think they would be horribly amiss if they didn't go in there with these tools to really help arm themselves with at least another layer of protection, because I know kids are going to be unsupervised. I know my own kids at some point are going to be unsupervised. I know at some point my kids are probably going to access that. I would love to live in a fairy tale world and hope that never happens.
Right.
So I think those conversations, or when my phone buzzes and I can check an app and go, okay, we're going to have a conversation.
People I've spoken with so far are not familiar with this specific app, but there's an app called Bark. It appears to be more specifically able than others I've seen to alert parents. It filters pornography, blocks any websites you want to block. But if they're on social media, for example, and they're having a conversation and there are buzzwords that they see that sound like this could be bullying, or
Sure.
this could be really depressive, this could be suicidal thoughts. Now the parent will get an email about that. So you don't have to look at every single conversation. You'll get an email specifically because the
Sure.
software targets specific words, right, that
Right.
might come up. And then you'll read that and you'll see, oh, okay, that's nothing. Or, oh, I need to talk to my kid about that. And this one appears to do that more than anything else I've seen. Not that I have it. If you're going to let them on a social media platform, then you've let them on it. So outside of grabbing their phone and saying, I'm going to look at this now and see what you've said, are you aware of software that automatically scans it and warns the parents if some certain buzzwords are? Because Bark is the only one I know of that I think does that.
Right. The only one I'm familiar with, and again, this is just through the school, is Go Guardian. We all had school issued devices, so it was all installed. And it would send a report to the teacher, obviously the administrator, but then we could also forward those reports to parents. Now, a lot of times you'd follow up with the kid, like you said, and they were just on a website, didn't seem inappropriate, but it was very sensitive to certain things. That one kid, we had to call in because he was reading about a bombing. Now, it was a
Right.
legit story about a bombing, like war related, but it did cue that up. And then it would immediately alert the administrator and the teacher. And I have heard of Bark. I'm not very familiar with it. I think there's a lot of things as parents, we have to do due diligence too and see what's out there. There's clearly a need. I think technology is seen and people are seeing that I need to develop some of these things because we have to have limits. We have to have parameters. Humans, and with our sinful nature, we need as many of those parameters and limits that we can set,
Right.
I think, frankly, as we can.
So then your own personal advice for you've got a teenager begging for a phone kind of thing, right? So you've now done this, you've just broken that barrier with your 14-year-old.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, what should my rules be if I give my
Right.
teenager a phone? It's going to have a filter on it of some sort. They're going to
Absolutely.
be able to see it at any time. It's going to go in the cabinet at night, other things like that. What am I missing?
I think those would be the three big ones. And my wife actually started leading by example. She started putting hers in the cabinet before we ever got our daughter a phone.
That I could totally see that. If you're going to tell your 14-year-old, okay, because you have a phone, you're going to have to put that thing in the cabinet at night. And yet every time your kid needs a glass of water in the middle of the night and they open your door, there you are on your phone, then they're not going to like your rule.
Absolutely.
So that's a good thing that all parents could do right now. That would certainly make it a whole lot easier to put that then on your child.
It laid a nice foundation. One that I think that helps our children when they see mom and dad doing it. I think it's easier to buy in, with those things as a parent too. And it does require effort and energy. Like you have to be willing to follow through on those limits and parameters you set as well. And I think kids respond pretty well to that when they understand those limits and parameters. Our daughter, even the other day, I said, "Can I see your phone?" She's like, "Sure." And I even got my little thumbprint in there so I can unlock it. And, I'm scrolling. And then it was a beautiful moment because, she's kind of sitting there like, there's nothing you're going to find, which as a parent was very reassuring.
Right.
She's not looking over my shoulder like, oh, and then too, as a parent, you need to do that. I mean, I think there's a necessity in it because you have to help them. She even asked about an app and I said, well, no, let me check that out. And then, my wife even said, this doesn't look right, and something popped up, so we're kind of navigating it. It ended up being innocent. Sometimes it's not. The other thing I would encourage parents, there's a lot of things you can do through your phone carrier. Sometimes check if you have Sprint or Verizon. I think there's even some things there with your internet carrier. There's apps for the router and different things to tell you where people have been. So there's even some things past just the general web supervision that you can also do. So that would be something else I would encourage parents, because I do think less is more when it comes to this. And I know a lot of our friends have just given them phones that basically can call and text, which again, I applaud. Then it doesn't even have access to internet. You don't dangle things in front of people's faces to entice them in a negative way. These things can damage kids. It's a world as a parent, it's scary because we can't supervise my kid and keep her safe as much as I'd want to, as much as I'd like to. But I do think we owe it to ourselves and our children to go that extra step to say, let me see your phone. Let me put this software on it. Let me have conversation. I think that's the other piece sometimes that I see, Bob, that's missing with the phones is I don't see a lot of parents just having hearty, heartfelt, intimate conversations with their children. Let's put the phone down for a minute. Tell me about your day. Tell me who you're talking to. And those things need to happen as well, for sure.
To the extent that you can use that as a tool to open up conversations, right, with your kids. We're all putting them down because we're going to talk about our day. Even if it rings, you do not answer your phone at the dinner table, right. Things like that.
When it comes to technology and families, I would think less is more.
All right, Jason. Well, thanks for sharing. Thanks for spending some time with us today, talking about the good that we can get from technology, but how it is that we can protect our kids, be good role models for our kids, right? And even use these as moments of learning and opportunities to deepen our relationship within our own families. So thanks for spending time with us today.
Thanks again for having me, Bob. It was an honor and a privilege.
And I want to thank all of our viewers and listeners for tuning in on this episode of our Being Pro-Life series. And to the website to view more resources talked about in this episode at www.catholicaoc.org/beingprolife. Thanks again for joining us today. I look forward to being with you next time.